This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, leaders, today I'm honored to have Chuck Wisner on the show. And he is the author of a book called The Art of Conscious Conversations, which we're going to talk about today, which I think is going to be awesome. He's also a thinker, coach, teacher of organizational strategy and human dynamics and leadership, and has been helping leaders for about 25 years. So we're going to get a lot of wisdom from Chuck today. With all that being said, Chuck, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are, and what is it exactly that you do today?
Okay. I have an interesting history. My first profession was as a musician. I'm a percussionist, trained classically, and then I moved to Boston and became an architect, and I practiced architecture in Boston for 20 years. And then I, through a series of things of learning about conflict in the building industry, which is there's never a shortage of, and a problem with one of our partners, I got introduced to a whole new world of language and conversations, and I ended up I did mediation for years, and then I ended up studying something called the ontology of language, the power of language, and changed careers, and started working with some folks at MIT around transformational leadership. And I've had my own company for the last 25 years or so, working with leaders at Fortune 200 companies around culture, communication, and leadership.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So that's a big change, especially when you start out with music and then switch to how much of that musical background helps you when it comes to like, do you have analogies or metaphors and things that kind of can help you tie into helping people on a leadership perspective?
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good question. Because most people are curious about connecting the dots, even between architecture and what I do now. And the music thing is also an interesting connection. Basically, the music piece, what you learn in music, and I did everything. As a young kid, I did rock and roll, and then I did symphonies, and then I ended up in jazz trios. But in music, the real art there is how you collaborate with others. You have to put all the pieces together. You have to listen really carefully. You have to, let other people shine. You can't always be the shining light. So it's collaboration, and it's that it sort of develops an ability to listen and tune in to others. That's a very different art form than, say, our left brain rational linear thinking. And then architecture, you learn to take complexity and take complexity and find the organizing principles behind it, and get to the real root of an issue. And that's something that I really cherish, because many people aren't taught how to do that. And it comes very handy when I'm working with leaders and companies that are struggling with solving a particular problem or doing a change effort. Do they really understand what the root of the problem is? So there's a lot of cool connections between music and architecture, and where I ended up and how I work with leaders and teams now.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially on the architecture side too, when you talk about designing and building and going forward. But also, I really like what you said about music, when you have to, maybe it's your time for a solo, or maybe it's not. Maybe you're the background, and knowing how to relate those two together. That's really cool.
Yeah. And that plays out in the business world all the time. We are trained to have the answers. We are rewarded to have the answer for the problem. And actually, my experience is, the higher you get up the ladder, or the more responsibility you get as a leader, the more likely it is that you can't have all the answers, and you have to rely on the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. And that's one of the things that as a new leader, I struggled with was relying on people around me because I wanted to make sure, I kind of wanted to
Mm.
show that I was worthy of being the, the manager or the boss or whatever. And didn't realize that like the true leaders is when you let the others around you kind of shine and understand that they have better expertise than you do sometimes.
Yeah, and bring the best out in them. It all reflects back on you as a good leader. So,
Yeah.
and honestly, as a leader, you're going to make better decisions if you have multiple voices, if you allow multiple voices and multiple opinions to enter into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me why you wanted to talk about conversations.
Well, it's interesting when I was shifting from architecture to leadership advising and coaching. Um, I studied some folks, and basically it was a study on the power of language
Yeah.
and how language shapes our reality and how language shapes our leadership and our communication. And and what I discovered was how little I really understood about it.
Mm,
I mean, I went to architecture school. I went through that whole grueling process, but
mm,
that the fundamentals when you end up having to navigate complex conversations or conflictual conversations, we fail a lot. And when in my studies, what I recognized was that, well, we don't understand the fundamentals of even how conversations work, why they work, and why they don't work. And we aren't given the tools to sort of be much more aware so that we can make different choices. So basically, we learn how to have conversations and how to relate through our families and our cultures. Um, and we are actually rewarded to have the answers in school, and then we're rewarded in business to have the answers. But we never taught the real art of collaboration, of co-creativity, and storytelling. That
mm.
really it gives us some fundamental understandings that help us hear differently and think differently and interact differently.
Mm.
And that was the purpose of my book, to sort of break it down, break these fundamental conversations down. There's 4 types of conversations in the book, to break conversations down so we can hear and see them and act with them differently.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about those four conversation types and how we in business might use this.
Yeah. So there's basically the 4 types are storytelling, collaborative conversations, creative conversations, and commitment conversations.
Mm,
And the reason that so the book is organized around those 4, and it's very purposeful because there's a linear process to them, how they unfold. And so the more we understand our stories that we tell ourselves or tell others, which is basically we tell stories based on our beliefs and based on our prejudices of the world and all that kind of stuff. And we tell stories about others. We have internal stories about ourselves, and we have stories that we tell about work or whatever we're doing. And so the understanding that stories are made up of emotions, facts, and opinions, and we need to break that down so that we become not only better storytellers, but we become more awake, more aware storytellers, and we have to do our own work. For me, the learning when I was studying language, the learning was, my gosh, I had stories that were very limiting. I had stories that I grew up with from my grandfather that I wasn't a big enough man. And as a little boy, hearing that over and over again, that stuck. And I had this story that I wasn't up to snuff. I wasn't being big enough man or whatever the hell that meant
mhm,
until I was able to bust that story. And when I was able to bust that story, all of a sudden that changed how I saw myself in the world. That changed how I presented myself in the world. And so we do our own work, storytelling. And then when we sort of get a handle on that, the next conversation is collaborative. And so our ability to collaborate with others has a lot to do with whether we're egocentric, whether we're stuck on our perspective, whether we can't listen to others. I mean, listening is really the art of collaboration, like
mm,
we mentioned in music. And so in that conversation, we break it down. It's like, how do we advocate? How do we inquire? How do we collaborate? How do we learn from others? And that's a very different kind of conversation than what most of us are trained to do, which is to have the answer and push to be right in the room. So, if you do collaborative conversations better, what happens is we automatically, if you and I were in this intense collaborative conversation where I'm learning from you, you're learning from me, we're trying to solve a problem, but we have different respects and we listen, all of a sudden we're in this more open mind space, and creative ideas can flow more easily. Ideas bubble up that neither of us might have had. And that's that creative conversation. That conversation is also about trusting our intuition and listening to our right brain as well as our left brain. And then, so those three conversations are really the unfolding of interactions. And then finally, the last conversation, which we all are addicted to, was the commitment conversation. And we're addicted to it because it's the action conversation. It's a conversation that says, well, okay, who's going to do what by when, blah, 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 and how. And we are addicted to action. So we love that conversation, but we actually do what I call a conversational bypass. Most meetings, most times, we are so hell-bent on making a commitment conversation. Okay, making a promise. Who's doing what by when? That we skip the others. And so we end up making a promise or making an agreement that actually hasn't been well vetted, or perhaps didn't take into account other perspectives, or other people's perspectives. So that bypass is a real big trap in leadership, especially for young leaders. To, like you mentioned, you really wanted to prove yourself, right? So it's like, I have to have the answer. I'm going to find the answer. I'm going to take action. And that really keeps us from having those other powerful conversations.
Yeah.
So that's a real shortcut of all four.
Yeah, it does a lot of things. I mean, it prevents us from having this conversation that, fuels my ego, which is not good. It
Right.
it makes me a bottleneck too for my team, because when you have a team of at the time I had 6 direct reports, but I had to be the one to give the answers. There's only one of me, but there's 6 of them. Like,
There's that,
yeah, it's a you can't scale that way. And if you want to scale, from a leader perspective, you've got to listen to others. And I think
absolutely. And scaling is, the bigger the group you're leading, or the bigger the team you're leading, the more you have to rely on them, because you can have your finger on the pulse of things, but you can't be on top of everything.
Right.
So absolutely. It's a crucial skill. Yeah. So these 4 are really crucial to just begin to think about conversations a little differently, and to slow down a little bit and say, okay, can I ask questions instead of having the answers? Can I invite people into a conversation so they feel safe to disagree with me? Can we generate crazy ideas, creative ideas that I might not think about myself, so that we make sure we come up with the best solution.
So what advice would you have for leaders when it comes to these kind of conversations that struggle maybe with listening? Because I still today, after managing for 20 years, I still struggle sometimes with listening to people and not just overriding them with my idea. Like, especially when I'm pretty sure this is the right way to go. I'm 90% sure. I just want to throw it out there and get done and move on. But I realize that I need to take a step back and listen sometimes. And every now and then I'll be surprised with an idea that I didn't have that was much better than mine. But how do I? What advice would you have someone that struggles with that?
So in the storytelling conversation, we break it down into 3 parts. There's facts, which, facts have become controversial in this political age, but by facts, we think, right, okay, what true facts? What are the things that we can agree on? What are the things that we absolutely agree on? It's snowing today. It's cold out today. We have this budget. We don't have that budget. We have this time frame, not that. What are the facts we can agree on? Then there's the emotions that come up, and then where our ego kicks in, right? Because then we have our emotion, we have our trigger, we have our behavior. But then there's our opinions. And most of the time, what we're doing in a meeting, when we feel like we have to have the answer, or we have to be the smartest one in the room, what we're doing is we're pushing our opinion on other people. And what I'd like to do in the book is help people break down their opinions. And there's 4 key elements to doing this. And I'll whip through them really quickly. Every opinion you have, every judgment you have, there's a desire hidden underneath it. What am I trying? What do I want? I want it to go my way. I don't want it to go this way, or I want a bigger budget, or I want the raise, or I want the promotion. We have a desire. Those are beautiful because they give us goals, but they also are dangerous because we often have desires that don't align with reality. I worked with a leader once who was hell bent. He was going to get the next vice president job. He was a director, and he interviewed for it. He was convinced he was going to do it, and he didn't get it. And he was terribly disappointed. And the problem was his desire to have that job was so big that he couldn't see the reality of how other people saw him. They didn't see him as a leader. They didn't see him as a good team leader. So anyway, our desires are lovely, and they're also a trap. The second thing is every opinion, every judgment you have a bunch of concerns. Like, why am I worried about this? Why am I making this judgment? Because I don't want tomorrow to look like today, or I don't want next week to fail the same way we did last week. So concerns are really powerful. No one can take them away from you, but we forget to talk about them. The third thing is there's always power issues. There's always authority issues, dynamics of authority. It doesn't matter whether you're the leader or you're the follower or whether you're with your colleagues. We give different people's voices different levels of power,
Yes.
Which changes how we listen to them and how we interact with them. So understanding the power dynamics, the ones we have, the ones that set us back, the ones that serve us, the ones that don't serve us, are really important to look at. And the last one of the four is standards. Every judgment you have is based on some set of standards of what's right or wrong or good or bad or successful or not successful for you particularly. And so again, with like concerns, our standards are so obvious to us. They're sort of in the background of our consciousness that we forget that other people might have the same standard. So if nothing else, people take out of this little chat we're having, write down those four things of desires, concerns, authority, and standards. And as a leader, instead of saying, I think we should do X, which is jumping to that commitment conversation, taking action, you can, instead of saying, this is what I believe, you can open your hand up and go, you know what, I have a concern. Here's my desire, and here's my standard. Here's how I'm measuring success. What that does is instead of going in with a closed fist saying, this is what we should do, you're going with an open hand and say, I have an opinion, and I don't want you to give that up. I'm saying I don't expect people to give their opinion up, but I expect them to reveal their thinking underneath and their beliefs underneath their opinion. And that is a conversational game changer.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, it's a bit humble. You're being a bit vulnerable, but it also allows other people to say, wow, I have a different standard. Let's talk about that. So, or I have a different set of concerns. Let's talk about them. That's very different than just butting heads on what we should do or shouldn't do from an action point of view.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Are there some questions that we should ask ourselves to help us figure out what our standards are or what our concerns are? Because sometimes it's hard to put those into words, like you just have a feeling sometimes. It's really hard to kind of articulate that. Are there some standard questions we should ask ourselves?
Yeah, no, these are the questions.
Okay.
I mean, these are the questions, and it takes a little bit of effort, and you have to, you do the work. You have to be willing to, look in the mirror back at yourself and say, well, so if I have a really strong opinion, that guy is acting like a jerk, and I don't want to be part of it. Take that apart. My experience is with asking these questions. Well, why am I concerned about that? Well, what are my standards? Well, he shouldn't behave the way he does. He shouldn't treat people that way. Or what's the power issues involved? So if you just ask yourself those questions, you're getting underneath your opinion to actually even acknowledge yourself and inform yourself about what's driving your opinion, what's driving your strong judgment, right? And it's a lot easier to talk about, I have a standard, I have a standard that says, bosses shouldn't treat people that way. And then we have power issues. Can you tell your boss that? Can you tell HR that? I mean, it's so the four of them play together. They're not always all relevant, but just think of them as questions rather than sort of just, pieces of our opinion. It's literally ask the question, why do I care so much? What's my standard? What's driving this? That does two things. It wakes you up a little bit from sleepwalking and sleep talking. And it gives you, and actually gives you something to shift the conversation and say, well, I think, we're talking about two different actions, but can we go underneath that and say, what's driving your opinion? And then I can share what's driving my opinion. That is the opening to a better collaborative, creative conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great thing. I think it's always great when you peel back the onion, if you will, and get to the point, well, what is driving that, and understand like why they have those concerns, or and dig into that part, because that's where the questions really are, right? That's where the issues that need to be resolved.
Yeah, that's right. And I often say to folks, it might be scary at first to ask yourself those questions, to really be honest. You have to be honest with yourself. You can't lie to yourself or fool yourself. But when you do ask the questions, there's little golden nuggets in there. You say, oh, you know what? We just are looking at this from a different perspective, and let's talk about our different concerns. That's a lot easier conversation than to fight about which decision to make.
Yeah.
So they're little golden nuggets, so you can discover that you can be the person that changes the conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. One thing I have a question when it comes to commitment and those type of conversations. One of the things that I struggle with sometimes is I'll make a commitment that, well, let's just be honest with you, that I can't live up to.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot when it comes to software development, where we'll commit to a date of building something, and then things will happen, things will come up, and we'll have to push that date, or something
Right.
will come up to. How do we become better at living up to our commitments, or making commitments that are obtainable?
Yeah. So, the byline of the commitment conversation is don't make promises you can't keep.
Right.
That sounds easy, but, when we're in the fast mode of, a shrum, or, we're in a fast mode of a quick activity, we make these flash decisions. The trick is the commitment conversation is actually really pretty complex. And if you think about it, we are addicted to yes.
Yes.
We want to please people. We want to say, someone drives by and says, "Hey, can we get this coding done by next week?" And say, "Sure, no problem." And all of a sudden, there's a commitment made, but it's pretty sloppy, is what I call a sloppy promise. And so, being aware of the process, to say, you know what, you have three choices. You can either say yes to something, you can say no to something, which most people don't think is okay, but in fact, we have to have it as part of our vocabulary. To maybe set boundaries, to be honest about, well, I can't say yes because I'm not competent to do that. Or the third option, which is the best option that we aren't really educated around, is anytime someone makes a request of you or wants to make you a promise with you, the counteroffer. First of all, clarity of what does the request mean. So when you say, "Hey, can you get that coding done?" Well, why do you need it? Do you need it? Let me understand what the outcome needs to be. Let me understand who's it for. Just a few questions of clarity, so you're making a promise you can keep. And then the next thing is, you probably, in many cases, can't fulfill every element of that request by Tuesday at noon, for this way, in this format, this PowerPoint, whatever it is. You might not be able to fulfill them all, but the counteroffer says, I get the format, I get who you want it for, I get why we're doing it, but I can't do it by Tuesday. I can do it by Wednesday. So that one shift of saying, the counteroffer is, I can't do it Tuesday morning, I can do it Wednesday. The counteroffer is a very powerful move. It's saying to the other person, I want to fulfill the promise, I want to make a commitment, I want to build trust with you. I can do this, but I can't do that. And then the other person gets to go, oh, well, that doesn't work for me, so maybe somebody else can do it. Or, oh, yeah, that works for me. Wednesday is fine. Do you need my help? So the commitment conversation, again, is there's a pattern to it. Someone makes a request. You get to clarify or not. You get to say yes, no, counteroffer. And then if you build a good promise, it's more likely you'll fulfill it. And that's how trust is built. So there's a diagram in the book of how this whole thing unfolds. So it's good to understand, but it's also good to know that we have this tendency as humans, especially in business and at home, actually, to do a quick yes, do a quick sure. And if we can just slow that down a little bit, to ask a few questions, then we're actually slowing that bypass into just being addicted to taking action and saying yes.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the, most important things is that counter offer, or that, and slowing things down, and getting to the point where you can think about it. Because one of the lessons, or I guess tools or tips that I've discovered, especially when it comes to like, project management, and you're managing a team, and your boss comes in with this new project or new thing that they need done, new task, and they say, I need this done by Friday. And you always just want to say, sure, no problem, and get it done.
Yeah.
And then, you drop the ball. So what I've learned is, kind of negotiating the way you said, is just say, yes, we can get that done by Friday, but which one of these other things can we stop doing? Because we have to stop doing something.
Exactly. Because what happens, bosses tend to put another thing on your plate, another thing on your plate. And if you can't say, yeah, I can do this, but there are other can we flip other priorities, or we change the other priorities?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a great point. Getting into that same mindset, and it's really helpful.
Yeah, and all I do in the book is break that whole conversation down so we know how it works, which gives us the tool to do what you were saying, to say, slow it down a little bit, ask some questions, say what you can do, you can't do. That literally, that is the root of how trust is built, and that's the root of how distrust comes about. Yeah.
So where did the title of the book come from?
That's a good question. When I wrote the beginning of the outline of the book, I got an agent in New York, and then we ended up getting a publisher. They actually did a little search around what people liked. So we had different titles for the book. And what the art of conscious conversation means is we grow up being in conversation through our families and our cultures, like I said earlier. Though it also means we're often in conversations on autopilot, where we're just going through the motions without being aware. One of my teachers once said to me, we're like fish in water. We're humans in conversation, but we're in fish in water. They aren't even aware that they're in water. We're in conversation. We're not even paying attention. We're just doing our thing. We're doing what we know to do in conversations. So becoming more conscious of them really wakes us up as, oh, I don't have to respond that way. I don't have to react that way. I can do it. I can do it another way. I can practice slowing down. I can practice asking more questions. I can practice doing things differently. So that's the idea of conscious conversations. It's just to wake up so we aren't sleep talking.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And when I think of consciousness, I just think about that, like, you're engaged, you're kind of paying attention to it. You're aware.
You're in the moment. You're aware. You're saying, "Whoa, well, they just asked me to do this. I'm not sure I can say yes." And then you're just more awake and aware, and so you have better choices. When we're in anxiety and we feel like we have to say yes, that's a real trigger. We get triggered around that, and then we can't make our best decisions because we aren't. What happens when we get triggered and our behaviors go automatic is we are less. We can be less present, because in that kind of anxiety moment, our bodies and stuff are more projecting, and they're not aware. They can't be aware and alert in the moment.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. Because, whenever, and I suffer from, mild anxiety when something comes up and gets, triggers me, one of those things that I'm not comfortable with happens, like maybe having a difficult conversation or something like that. You kind of, you're right. You go on autopilot, and a lot of times, you won't even remember what happened. Like, did I say that? Went through the motions.
Exactly. Then 10 minutes later, you think, "Oh, dang, I could have done something differently."
Oh, 100%.
But that's because what happens when we're in anxiety, our neocortex sort of shuts down, which is our thinking brain. Like, that sort of gets overridden by the anxiety. So, but 10 minutes later, when you're you're not in that moment, you go, "Oh shit, I missed a moment. I could have said X instead."
Yeah, there's so many times where I'm like, "Why didn't I say this?"
Exactly.
And now if I say it doesn't, like, it doesn't mean anything because it's not in the moment,
It's over. It's over. Yeah. Although you can always recover. There's a piece in my book around recovery conversations when we don't keep our promise, or someone else doesn't keep their promise. How do we make honorable complaints and fair complaints, and also fair apologies? to say, let's reset this because I didn't hold up my end of the bargain. I want to reset it. How can I fix the damage done?
Yeah.
And how can we repair our relationship? Because in the end, that's what you want to do. You want to keep building that trust.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those really hard things to kind of fix.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When it goes that far south, then trust becomes a very overriding sort of opinion. I just can't trust them. I can't trust that person or that guy or that gal. And that then we're in a whole nother ballpark of recovering and figuring out how to undo that. I mean, and trust is three things. It's are we competent? Do we do what we say we're going to do? Are we reliable? And are we sincere? Do what we say is what we're saying in public the same as what we're thinking privately? But that's a whole nother subject where I break down trust. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's really, once you're down that distrustful road, it's a hard road back. Yeah. It takes a lot of humility and a lot of admitting for that of how things happen and why things broke and why we made bad promises.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, trust is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Chuck, this has been great. I really appreciate having you on and teaching us some about these conversations. How can people connect with you online, pick up a copy of your book, and learn more about conversations?
Yeah. So my website is chuckwisner.com, ChuckWisner.com. And I am on LinkedIn, Chuck_Wisner, and I'm on Instagram. And my book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I'd love people to get a copy and give me a review or reach out to me on my website. If there's a way to get a free copy of the introduction to my book, a PDF of the introduction. So I encourage people to do that. At least it gives them a little taste of the outline of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll link those two in the show notes at geekleader.com so people can go through and click through there. And notice you also have an Audible version. It's about 5 hours long, so it's a great, easy listen. So highly recommend everybody going and checking that out.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate having you.
Yeah, thanks for a conversation about conversations.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.